7:12 a.m. The day started with the low grind of diesel engines outside my window. By 7:20, the crash of metal jaws. That's when they came with bulldozers. 12 tons of steel against 40 years of memory. The shed my father and I built when I was a boy. Oak rafters hand-cut, walls smelling of cedar oil, tin roof painted in my grandmother's favorite shade of barn red. Every hammer strike from back then, every nail sunk crooked by my small hands, flattened in under 6 minutes. Stood barefoot in the dew-soaked grass, heart pounding in my throat. Diesel exhaust burned the morning air. Splinters flew as the bulldozer's blade tore through siding, sending decades of tools scattering like bones. My late father's tackle box cracked open, spilling rusted hooks into the dirt. By the time I shouted, it was too late. The shed folded in on itself, groaning like a dying animal, and standing there, arms crossed, sunglasses perched high on her nose, was HOA President Veronica Hensley, 52 years old, perfectly pressed blazer, gold HOA badge pinned like a sheriff's star. She didn't flinch when the bulldozer crushed the final beam. She smirked, pulled out her phone, snapped photos as if my loss were her trophy. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that 50 yards beneath her feet, hidden under a locked grate, sat a concrete vault no one had touched in 3 decades. A utility hub my grandfather once called the heartbeat of this town. A box of humming transformers, fat conduits, and one massive breaker that fed every home in Willow Creek Estates. Flip it, and 312 houses would go dark. The clubhouse, the tennis courts, the resort-style pool that kept their property values inflated. Even the security cameras ringing Veronica's $1.2 million stucco palace. The HOA thought they bulldozed my shed. What they bulldozed was their own lifeline. My name's Daniel Carter, and 6 months ago, I thought I was just an unlucky man with a bad mortgage, a dead father, and a shed full of rusty memories. I didn't know I was sitting on the HOA's jugular vein. The story doesn't begin with the bulldozer, though. It begins 3 weeks earlier, with a letter slipped under my door, crisp white paper, crest of the Willow Creek HOA embossed in gold, fine print that read like scripture, unapproved outbuilding, non-conforming structure, $750 fine, accruing. At $150 per day until removed. I called their office, explained the shed wasn't some eyesore, told them it was built in 1981, long before there ever was a Willow Creek HOA. Told them it was where my father stored the tackle boxes, the camping lanterns, even the folding chairs we used when my mother was alive. You know what Veronica said? Mr. Carter, grandfather clauses don't apply here. Standards are standards. If you wanted sentimental value, you should have kept it inside your house. The words came out clipped, metallic, like a switchblade snapping open. By the time I hung up, my palms were wet, the phone slippery. Grief has a way of making you fight for things that don't even look important to outsiders. That shed wasn't just 4 walls. It was the last standing thing my father and I built together. For 3 weeks, I ignored the letters. One arrived every other day, penalties climbing higher, threats grew bolder. Lien authorization pending. Legal seizure possible. Removal scheduled. Then came that morning. The rumble of diesel. The crash of wood. The sound of a 40-year memory being erased. Neighbors peeked from their blinds, sipping coffee like it was morning television. No one intervened. No one dared cross Veronica. By 8 a.m., my shed was nothing but a heap of splinters. By 8:05, the bulldozers rolled away, leaving dust and silence. Veronica slipped her phone back into her purse, heels clicking against the asphalt as if nothing monumental had happened. I stood in the wreckage, breath shallow, knees weak. That's when I saw it. The grate. Half buried in ivy behind the ruins. A rusted steel lid no one noticed in years. I remembered my father mentioning it once when I was 12. "Don't ever mess with that box, Danny," he'd said. "Your grandfather wired half the neighborhood through it. They'll never admit it, but this house, this land, it keeps the lights on." I thought he was exaggerating, a tall tale told by a man who loved old wires and breaker panels more than people. But when I knelt and brushed away the ivy, I felt the vibration in the steel. A low hum, steady, alive. They had bulldozed my memories. But in their arrogance, they'd reminded me of the power beneath my soil. And in that moment, standing barefoot in the splinters of my father's shed, I realized something. Veronica thought. She'd humiliated me. What she'd actually done was hand me the switch to her entire kingdom. The HOA didn't stop at bulldozing my shed. They doubled down. By the next morning, a fresh violation notice was duct taped to my front door. Failure to comply with community standards. Legal escalation pending. Bold red letters, stamped with the HOA seal like a judge's sentence. Inside, the house felt colder than it should have. Not because of the thermostat, but because every corner still smelled faintly of sawdust and oil, my father's scent, carried on from the shed. Now it was gone, replaced by exhaust fumes and dust that clung to my clothes. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the notice. My coffee went untouched, cooling into bitterness. That's when the phone rang. Unknown caller. I picked up, hoping for maybe a neighbor, maybe someone with a shred of decency. Instead, Veronica's voice slid through the line. "Mr. Carter," she said, her words clicking sharp like her heels. "Consider this your final warning. Non-compliance carries consequences. I suggest you look into short-term rentals. You may not be a homeowner here much longer." Click. Silence. I set the phone down so gently it didn't make a sound. Then I laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from joy. The kind that sounds like it might crack you open if you let it go too long. They thought they owned me. Thought they could bulldoze 40 years of memory, slap me with fines, and push me out. But I had something they didn't. That grate. That hum. That memory of my father's warning. I pulled on work gloves and grabbed a crowbar from what little was left in the rubble. The grate was half sealed with rust, bolts frozen by years of rain and neglect. It took an hour, maybe more, prying and cursing, sweat dripping into my eyes. Finally, with a groan, the steel lid gave way. The smell hit first. Ozone and damp concrete, the scent of machinery left to sweat underground for decades. A ladder descended into the dark. I clicked on a flashlight and climbed down. The chamber wasn't large, maybe 20 feet square, walls lined with conduit thick as my forearm. At the center sat a steel box the size of a coffin, humming low, steady, alive. Breakers and dials, each labeled in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Sector A, Sector B, Clubhouse. At the bottom, one massive switch, painted red, faded but clear. Master. I ran my hand along the cold metal, and for the first time in weeks, the tightness in my chest loosened. Veronica could find me. She could bulldoze my shed. She could laugh into her phone and threaten me with lawyers. But every smug sip of wine in her chandeliered dining room, every heated yoga session at the clubhouse, every kid scrolling TikTok in a $1 million living room, it all ran through here. Through me. My land didn't just hold their water table like some neighbors whispered. It held their power. Literally. I climbed back up, bolted the grate shut, and dragged a tarp over it. The weight of what I'd found pressed on me like storm. Clouds. I wasn't ready to use it, not yet. But knowing it was there, that was enough to breathe again. Days passed. The HOA's harassment grew. A lean threat arrived in my mailbox. $14,250 in accrued fines. A number designed to suffocate. 2 board members walked my property line with clipboards, snapping photos, whispering like vultures circling a carcass. And every night, as porch lights flickered across Willow Creek, I'd walk barefoot to the ruins of my shed. Stand above the grate, listen to the hum vibrating through the earth. I started to imagine it. The clubhouse lights cutting out mid-gala, the tennis courts dark in the middle of a championship. Veronica fumbling for her phone. In a blackout, her perfect empire collapsing in silence. It wasn't just revenge. It was balance. But revenge doesn't cook overnight. It simmers. It waits. And the boil came sooner than I expected. Saturday. Community barbecue. HOA's pride event. The kind of showy gathering where Veronica rented string lights, piped music across the lawn, and paraded her Range Rover like royalty. Every homeowner required to attend, dues paying for food that tasted like cardboard and control. I stood at the edge of the crowd, paper plate in hand, watching her hold court. Neighbors nodded along, nervous laughter bubbling at her jokes. Every word she spoke carried that unspoken threat: comply or be crushed. Then she saw me. "Mr. Carter," she announced, loud enough for the crowd. "So glad you could join us. Everyone, this is the gentleman who thought his tool shed was exempt from our community standards. A round of applause for our free spirit." Laughter rippled. Forced, awkward, cruel. My ears burned, but my face didn't break. Because as her laughter echoed across the lawn, I wasn't picturing her smirk. I was picturing the red switch beneath my land, the one word stamped above it: Master. And in that moment, I knew. The shed was gone. My father's work, erased, but in its place I had something more powerful. I had their leash, and soon I was going to yank it. The week after the barbecue, the pressure mounted. Letters piled in my mailbox like funeral programs. Red-stamped final notice across envelopes thick with legal jargon. Fines now eclipse $20,000, interest compounding like rot. But paper, threats weren't enough for Veronica. She wanted blood. Tuesday morning, I woke to the whine of power tools outside. Stepping onto my porch, I froze. 2 contractors in neon vests were planting stakes along my driveway, spray painting orange lines through the gravel. One of them held a blueprint. At the end of the driveway, Veronica leaned against her white Mercedes, coffee cup in hand, sunglasses. Catching the morning sun, I walked up fast, chest tight. "What the hell is this?" She smiled without looking at me. "Driveway expansion, community beautification project. Your property happens to be the easement. Consider it part of your contribution to the neighborhood." Her tone was casual, dismissive, like she was talking about trimming a hedge instead of carving up my land. I looked at the blueprint. Their expansion cut 20 feet into my yard, straight through where the shed had stood, straight over the grate. That wasn't coincidence. She knew, or at least she suspected. I felt heat rise in my throat, but I didn't explode. Not yet. I just said, calm as stone, "You're trespassing. Leave." Veronica's laugh cut sharp across the air. "Oh, Mr. Carter, you really don't understand how this works, do you?" The contractors shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. She waved her hand, and they packed up, climbing back into the truck. But her smile stayed. A smile that said, this wasn't over. And she was right. It wasn't. That night, I went back to the grate, unscrewed the bolts, climbed down the ladder. I stood in the hum, flashlight beam trembling across steel. My hand hovered over the red switch, one flip, one motion. Every chandelier, every air conditioner, every glowing screen in Willow Creek Estates. Gone. But power is addictive and dangerous. Once you use it, there's no going back. So I waited. By Friday, the waiting ended for me. A certified letter arrived by courier. Thick envelope, heavier than the rest. Inside, notice of foreclosure proceedings. HOA liens filed with the county. Court date pending. They were going for the kill. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to the hum through the floorboards, imagining blackouts swallowing the neighborhood whole. And then, like an answer, thunder rolled across the sky. A storm blew in sudden and violent, rain slamming against the windows. At 2 a.m., lightning cracked so close it shook the house. The power flickered, dimmed, then steadied. But outside, across the lake, I saw the clubhouse lights stutter, the HOA's crown jewel, their pride, their kingdom. And I thought, why wait for them to destroy me? Why not strike first? I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on boots, walked through the storm to the grate. The ladder was slick. My gloves slipped on the rungs. Water trickled down the concrete walls as I descended into the hum. When I reached the master switch, my heart pounded so loud I couldn't tell if it was mine or the transformer's. I wrapped both hands around the cold steel handle, and I pulled. The sound was like a gunshot. Sparks spat. The hum died. Then silence. Heavy, absolute. I climbed up and stepped into the storm. The neighborhood lay before me, pitch black. No porch lights, no Range Rover headlights, no floodlit clubhouse. Just darkness swallowing mansions whole. And in that darkness, I smiled. Because for the first time since Veronica bulldozed my shed, I wasn't powerless. The HOA thought they controlled me with fines and threats, but I controlled their world with a single switch. The power wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine, and they were about to learn what it felt like to live at my mercy. The blackout spread faster than I imagined. Within 10 minutes, the entire subdivision was blind. Streetlights dead. Garage doors frozen mid-lift. Security systems silent. From my porch, I could see silhouettes of neighbors stumbling outside, waving phones like fireflies, their screens the only glow in a sea of black. Shouts carried across the storm, confused, angry, rising like a chorus of panic. "Power's out! Check the breaker!" "What's happening?" I leaned against the railing, rain dripping from my hair, watching. Chaos unravel. By midnight, the HOA's precious clubhouse, once lit like a jewel, was just a dark outline against the lake. Their emergency generators had sputtered on for 5 minutes, then choked out. Probably because I'd already traced the auxiliary feeds and cut those lines weeks earlier, just in case. I hadn't planned to use this weapon yet. But watching Veronica's empire stumble in darkness lit something inside me. For once, they were the ones scrambling. Not me. At 1 a.m., flashlights bobbed up my driveway. 4 figures in raincoats, huddled against the storm. They stopped short when they saw me standing there, calm as stone, shotgun propped against the porch rail. "Mr. Carter," a man called, voice tight. "We need access to the utility easement under your property. HOA's authorized it. Emergency. Measure." I didn't move, just let the silence stretch, thunder filling the gap. Veronica stepped forward, pulling down her hood. Her hair was soaked, makeup streaked, but the arrogance was intact. "Cut the games, Carter," she snapped. "We know the hub's under your land. Let us through and maybe we'll reconsider those liens." Her tone cracked just enough to betray it. Fear. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just angry. She was desperate. Because the HOA wasn't just about rules and lawns. It was about money. Property values, prestige. The blackout threatened it all. I let the barrel of the shotgun tilt lazily toward the ground. "You trespassed once already," I said, voice low. "You bulldozed what was mine. You won't touch this land again." Veronica's jaw tightened. She turned to her crew, muttered something, then they all retreated down the drive. Their flashlights vanished into the storm. I stayed on the porch till sunrise, rain soaking me to the bone. But I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt in control. By morning, the storm had passed, but the damage lingered. The HOA sent out a mass email, blaming a regional outage. A lie. I knew it. They knew it. But the neighbors? They believed it. For a day. Then came day 2. Still no power. Freezers thawing, air conditioning silent, Tesla chargers useless. The complaints poured in. People shouting in the streets, demanding answers. By day 3, residents gathered at the clubhouse steps, furious. And there was Veronica, standing on a folding table, voice hoarse as she promised rapid resolution. But I could see it in her eyes. She had no solution. because the switch was mine alone. On day 4, things shifted. I woke to find 2 county utility trucks parked at the edge of my property. Men in hard hats stood by the grate, scratching their heads. Veronica watched. From her Mercedes, phone glued to her ear, I walked out calm, coffee mug in hand. "Morning, gentlemen. Something I can help with?" One of them frowned. "We're here on an emergency order. HOA claims their grid ties in under your land. We're authorized to inspect." "Got a warrant?" I asked. They looked at each other. Shuffled their boots. No papers, just Veronica's word. "Well then," I said, sipping coffee. "You can leave." The men hesitated, then packed up, clearly uncomfortable. Veronica's face turned scarlet. She slammed her car door and sped off, tires spitting gravel. That night, I flipped the switch halfway. The neighborhood flickered to life, just for 15 minutes. Lights blazed, cheers echoed down the streets. Then, just as suddenly, darkness fell again. The message was clear: their comfort, their safety, their power, all of it depended on me. I didn't sleep that night. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't sustainable. The HOA would escalate. They'd bring lawyers, police, maybe even the feds, if they figured out the system's significance. But part of me didn't care, because every day in darkness was another nail in Veronica's coffin. And soon enough, I'd decide whether to hand them back their light, or plunge Willow Creek into permanent night. By day 5, Willow Creek Estates was unraveling, garbage piled at curbs, generators sputtered dry. Families fled to hotels outside the subdivision, while those who stayed whispered about looters and sleepless nights. The HOA board was cracking. 2 members resigned, citing personal safety. Another neighbor told me he'd overheard Veronica screaming on the phone with county officials, begging them to intervene. And me? I just sat on my porch drinking coffee, watching her empire rot. That afternoon, she showed up herself. Not in the Mercedes, not in her designer suits. She walked. Alone. Mud on her heels, hair tied back, face pale. She stopped at the bottom of my porch steps and looked up at me. No sunglasses, no smirk, just eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Carter," she said, voice raw. "We need to talk." For the first time, she didn't sound like a queen addressing a subject. She sounded like a drowning woman asking for a rope. I let her stand there in silence until she finally exhaled, shaky. "You win. The board's dissolving. The liens are dropped. I'll put it in writing. Just, please, give us back the power." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Months of harassment. My father's shed reduced to rubble. Threats, humiliation, foreclosure. And now here she was, begging. I thought about the grate, the switch, the hum that had become my heartbeat. For days I'd told myself it was about revenge, balance, making them feel what I felt. But standing there, looking at her stripped of all arrogance, I realized something else. It wasn't just about payback. It was about proving I wasn't powerless. That this land, my land, still meant something. That my father's work wasn't erased. It was alive, beneath my feet. I leaned forward on the railing. "You bulldozed my shed," I said quietly. "Do you have any idea what that meant to me?" Veronica swallowed. Her eyes flickered. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe she didn't. But I saw something break in her face. And for me, that was enough. That night, I walked to the grate. The storm had cleared, stars sharp above me. I climbed down the ladder one last time, flashlight trembling against the steel walls. The master switch loomed, red paint chipped and worn. My hand rested on it, heavy with choice. Leave them in the dark forever. Let the neighborhood die, and my father's secret fade with it, or restore the current. Not for Veronica, not for the HOA, but for the families, the kids, the ones caught in the crossfire of her arrogance and my revenge. I closed my eyes. thought of my father's voice, teaching me about the system. Respect the current, son. It's not about control. It's about responsibility. When I opened them, I pulled. The hum roared back to life. Lights surged across Willow Creek, one by one, like stars reappearing after eclipse. Cheers erupted. Neighbors shouted from their porches, hugging, crying. Relief washed through the streets like a tide. And me? I climbed back up, bolted the grate, and stood in the shadows. Because they would never know. Not the families, not the board, not even Veronica. They would never know that their comfort lived or died on the flick of my hand. The HOA was gone, the liens erased, my shed still rubble. But I'd built something new in its place. Power. Not the kind in cables and wires. The kind that comes when you stop letting people bulldoze your life. As the neighborhood glittered back to life, I turned, walked inside, and closed the door. The war was over, but the hum beneath my floorboards would always remind me, in Willow Creek Estates, I was the one holding the switch.